This is the grimmest of grim days. 10/7 was awful. 10/8, the horror set in. And since that time, I think most of my audience, certainly I, have been praying for the return of the Bibas family alive. Uh, they captured the hearts of the world, at least the civilized world, and their bodies were returned by Hamas today, following a disgusting celebration, as well as the body of Oded Lifshitz. There remain at least 30 living captives in Gaza, including Americans. But this is a gut punch. And anyone who loves babies, or has grandbabies, you can't but conclude that the deep evil in Gaza, there isn't going to be a phase two. I don't know if they're going to get any more of the 30 people out. I know Special Envoy Witkoff is committed to it. But I will talk with Seth Mangel and Josh Kroshower. They're not Israelis, but they're American Jews who cover Israel quite closely. I can't imagine Israel allowing one bloc to be standing in any tunnel, one Hamas member to be other than dead or gone after today. So it's a pretty brutal day. I do, however, want to begin by telling you that the most important thing in the world is China. So everything I say about international affairs and national security begins from the premise shared by Senator Cotton in his book, 7 Things You Can't Say About China. And that is, China is our deadliest adversary. So that there's no second place. I suppose you could say Russia or North Korea, since they have nukes, are in second place. But they are not nearly the sophisticated and deadly opponent that China is and has become, and which we've awakened to over the last, 8 years with a pause during the Biden incoherence. But they are the worst. They're absolutely our number one priority. So everything flows from that, if you get that right. Now, there are 3 other corollaries to premise number 1. China is our deadliest enemy. It's the one about which we have to be most concerned. Number 2, Putin is evil, but Russia cannot be defeated. All right? Russia is too big and too powerful to actually be defeated. Any change in that regime will be organic, and I don't expect it in my lifetime, and I don't think people who are 30 and older can expect it in their lifetime. I don't know if ever. Peter the Great tried, other people, Gorbachev tried, other people tried. It reverts. It reverts to czardom. And Putin's an evil czar. Sometimes they have good czars. It's pretty hard, but they can't be defeated. So what we got to do is help Zelensky get to a stable and acceptable peace. And when President Trump uses provocative language, I hope President Zelensky doesn't respond and simply goes forward, because there are lots of wheels within wheels within wheels, for those of you who know Dune, and there are lots of things. We have shuttles diplomacy going on. So we have J.D. Vance and General Kellogg in Europe last week, General Kellogg today in Ukraine. 3 weeks ago, we had Treasury Secretary Bessent in Ukraine. Then we had Secretary Rubio and National Security Advisor Waltz and Special Envoy Witkoff in Saudi Arabia. Wheels within wheels within wheels. We don't know. But I have become convinced there are a lot of people in the country with Trump derangement syndrome, many in the media, some in the Democratic Party, some don't do much politics, they just hate Trump for whatever reason. They'd rather see Trump fail to bring about a successful ceasefire in Ukraine than they would see Ukraine survive. Because everybody is eager to make things worse between Ukraine and the United States. That's not prudent. What's prudent is to understand diplomacy is complicated. There's a lot that is said that isn't meant. There's a lot that is meant that isn't said. And until it's over, we don't know how it's going to be over. So my suggestion is just sort of dial back, go into DEFCON 5 or 1, whichever is the highest, until after Easter. Let's give Team Trump, and there are a lot of people working on this, until Easter to see if they can make it happen. So Putin is evil, but Russia can't be defeated. China's our number one enemy. We got to keep our eye on China. Number 3, Hamas is evil, can and must be defeated. Because if they don't, the Israelis will have the same thing happen again. They will come for another kafir. They will come for the Bibas family, another family named the Bibases, if they are allowed to stay in Gaza. I don't know about the West Bank. I don't know enough about anything. I just know that the monster came out of Gaza, and the monster is not only unrepentant, the monster is even more diseased than it was before. Finally, Iran is evil, and it could be defeated. Now, I hope it is. Not sure that it will be. They could choose to quit. They could choose to say, Donald Trump, we hear you. Maximum pressure campaign has already caused rolling blackouts across Iran. We're going to throw in our nuclear weapons, send back the IAEA, send back your own inspectors. They can go anywhere at any time, not like the crazy deal that Obama did, which wasn't a deal. It was a collapse. We're not going back to that. We know you're serious. We know you killed Soleimani. We know you can destroy everything in this country in about 3 hours. That's what Ehud Barak once said to, I believe it was Bill Clinton. He was angry. Said, you can destroy the Iranian nuclear program in 3 hours. You don't have to send troops. You don't have to be involved. Send the B-2s. And maybe now the B-21s. I don't know that we're going to do that. Iran was given an opportunity to walk it back. So, long way of saying, China is our number one priority. Putin is evil but cannot be defeated. Hamas is evil and must be defeated. Iran is evil and could be defeated. All of that depends upon things neither you nor I know, or even have a remote chance of knowing. Because you and I don't even have the lowest level of clearance. I had the highest level of clearance 35 years ago. You know what that counts for? Nothing. All I know is that I don't know a lot. And it's something I think a lot of people in the media have a difficult time admitting. They really don't know what's going on, and therefore they make stuff up. What they think they understand is Donald Trump, and they know that some in their audience love to hate on Trump, so they serve that up piping hot every night whenever their show comes on. That is not conducive to good outcomes anywhere in the world. Anywhere in the world. And as Senator Cotton said in this, and we talked about it, we're going to talk about it after the break, 7 things you can't say about China. Every major news network, except Fox News Channel, is owned by a production company that is afraid of China because China controls distribution in the world's largest market. So ABC, CBS, NBC, CNN, their corporate parents are all afraid of China. So you're going to get a lot of hating on Trump. You're going to get a lot of disinformation about everything. You're going to get a one-sided view about how evil Hamas is, but you're not going to hear anything about China because they're afraid to tell you about the truth about China. That's why I'm very glad to see Cotton's book, 7 Things You Can't Say About China, is in the top 10 at Amazon. It was as high as number 3 yesterday. I don't know where it is today, but I really recommend you go out and get it and read it very quickly. He's coming up after the break. Let me take my relief factor early. I spent the morning, as you'll hear me talking about with Holmes a little bit, with the doctor. I'm fine, but it's one of those things you got to do. And so, not up the implacable hill today. That's tomorrow. But I got my Icarian curcumin, resveratrol, omega, and I take it every day. I take it at the beginning of the show. I tell you about it in hours 2 and 3. The reason I do that is so that you know I really do believe in the product. I really do use the product. I do believe it works. I think it keeps you, if not nimble, at least moving. If it doesn't keep you ache and pain-free, it gets rid of most of them. Can't fix a compressed vertebrae. It can't heal a broken leg. But it does get rid of the minor aches and pains that accompany exercise and aging. You should be doing the former. You're definitely doing the latter. So you want to go and get your relief factor by calling 1-800, the number 4, and the word relief. 1-800, the number 4, and the word relief. Or go find their starter pack for $19.95, 3-week supply of Relief Factor. That's less than $1 a day, relieffactor.com. Also want to tell you, our friend Dennis Prager, getting better every day, but here's a little bit of Pragertopia from today.
Noah was a righteous man, blameless among the people of his time. This is a brilliant insight. He was a truly righteous man in his generations. That's whom he is to be compared to. You don't compare people who lived in the past to people living today.
Dennis is available at Pragertopia. Stream everything Dennis Prager by joining Pragertopia. A lot of you are asking me. Everyone I see actually asks me how Dennis Prager is doing. I say getting better every day, and we keep praying for him like we're praying for the Pope to get better every day, and that's what you do. Dennis is making real progress. I hope I'll be able to interview him pretty soon. I don't know when that's going to happen. Find out how he's feeling and upbeat. But Pragertopia is out there for those of you experiencing Dennis withdrawal. Head over to pragertopia.com. Join and get him every single day. I'm running a series all week long with Senator Tom Cotton about his brand new book, 7 Things You Can't Say About China. Senator Cotton is chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee and has always had a focus on China. Senator, in Chapter 4, China has infiltrated our society. There aren't many surprises for me about LeBron. And LeBron is an Akron kid, and I always liked rooting for him. He did go completely yellow when China got involved. He shut up about, he's very, very famous for being involved in political causes in the United States. And I didn't know about the extent of some of these people, but here's what I didn't know. Disney, Comcast, Warner Brothers Discovery, Paramount Global own ABC, NBC, CNN, and CBS respectively. Do you trust them not to pull punches for China? I sure don't. That's on page 95. I didn't know that, actually, Senator. I'm in the business.
Yeah, and Hugh, this is an example of why I wrote this little book. Americans rightly have a very low opinion of communist China, but whatever they think about how dangerous China is or the threat it poses, it's actually even worse. That's what I've learned after 10 years on the Intelligence Committee and now as the chair and on the Armed Services Committee. I think some people realize that Hollywood is scared to death of China,
Yes.
Ever since Brad Pitt made 7 Years in Tibet in 1997, and Chinese communists came down on him and his studio like a ton of bricks. There's been no movies made with Chinese villains. You just can't find them in America because Hollywood studios depend on the very large, lucrative Chinese movie market. But one thing that Americans don't really appreciate, even though it's hiding in plain sight, as you just mentioned, is that aside from Fox News, every single major American news network is either owned by or affiliated with one of those studios. Is it a surprise that Fox News is the one that's toughest and most frank and candid on communist China? Is it a surprise that you don't get asked a single question about China in presidential debates that are hosted by some of those other networks? I don't think it is. But that's an example of what I mean about how China has infiltrated American society. It's used the great wealth it's built up that we discussed in the last segment to then turn and leverage it against America, not just to get more economic power, but to actually influence the politics and the debate and public opinion in our society.
Now, AP has been much in the news because they're out of favor with President Trump. Well, they should be. AP and Xinhap have been in a deal for, 25 years? I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah, and it's unclear the extent of the deal or how much it influences reporting in China. My suspicion is it's pretty large. Again, almost any one of these major news networks or media outlets wants access to China. They want their reporters to be in. They depend on Chinese sources to get news out of China. So most of the time, they dance to the tune that China plays for them.
All right, now I want to move on to higher ed. I knew we had a lot of students here. I did not know we had 290,000 Chinese nationals on student visas in 22 to 23. If only 1% of those are actively spying for China, it's 3,000 spies. I suspect it's significantly higher. What do you suspect, Senator Cotton?
Yeah, it is much higher. Most of the students that get out of China on an exit visa to come to the United States on a student visa are somehow the family or friends or associates of Chinese communist officials or PLA leadership. And they're going to these campuses that not primarily to study, say, the collected works of Shakespeare or the Federalist Papers, but rather to study the kind of scientific, technological, engineering, mathematics subjects that will then make them useful to China's economic growth and military power. And in the meantime, make them potential spies, especially once they get beyond the undergraduate level and they get into graduate and even postgraduate work. That's when they become incredibly valuable. And in the meantime, they're also means of Chinese influence on college campuses. So they're oftentimes spying, say, on Uyghur students who somehow escaped Xinjiang, where China has been conducting a genocide against the Uyghur people, and trying to intimidate them, or intimidating Hong Kongers who may be here now on refugee status because they were out of the country when China cracked down on Hong Kong 5 years ago. They can also, as happened when Xi came to the United States under President Obama, rally rapidly to become a force of pro-China influence on campuses.
Now, what surprised me in Chapter 4, China has infiltrated our society. Big Tech has done a lot of deals. I didn't realize the number. I'm supposed to know this stuff, and I don't know it. IBM designed the smart cities technology to monitor and centrally control every aspect of Chinese communist city life. IBM? Didn't they do the Nazi deal too?
IBM, Cisco, other blue chip American companies going back years, not recently, but years, whenever the opinion still prevailed in Washington that, well, if we just help China get wealthy and we introduce market techniques to them and help them take our companies and take our technology, they will become more politically moderate. They will stop the crackdown and the brutal oppression of their own people. They'll pull in their horns and stop the aggression around the world. Of course, that has not happened. It's the exact opposite. We've underwritten their oppression of their people. We've underwritten their military buildup. It's been one of the worst strategic mistakes in American history.
Now, I'm going to single out BlackRock, but they are not alone. They're just the most widely known. They had $430 million invested in blacklisted Chinese companies. What is a blacklisted Chinese company? What do you want BlackRock to do?
Well, I mean, in the general way, it means a Chinese company that is on one of the lists that's maintained by, say, the Department of Defense or the Department of Commerce, Department of State, that is affiliated with the PLA or with Chinese intelligence services, that's producing dual-use technology that can be used against America or our friends and partners around the world. Wall Street should not be investing in any blacklisted company. I would say that they shouldn't be investing in Chinese companies, that, especially those owned or directed by the communist state, because they're our adversary. Again, one simple principle I would encourage all of your audience to think about is, would we have allowed it to happen with communist Russia? And if the answer is no, then we shouldn't allow it to happen with communist China right now.
Is it possible to decouple? We got 30 seconds in this segment.
It's certainly possible to do so in a strategic way. We cannot allow ourselves to be dependent on China for goods that are vital to our health and our safety and our prosperity, whether it's basic pharmaceuticals or rare earth elements. There are other things that China produces that I wish we produced here, that we still have those jobs in America, like, say, Christmas decorations, almost all of which are produced in China. China doesn't have a lot of leverage over us just because we get our fake Christmas trees in China, but anything that's essential to our health and safety, we need to get out of China, preferably back to America.
Senator Cotton will be back with me for part 6 in our series. Do not miss it when it arrives. Earlier today, General Kellogg wrapped up a series of meetings with President Zelensky in Ukraine. General Kellogg, of course, is the special envoy that Donald Trump has working some of the wheels. Like I said, it's shuttles diplomacy, not one shuttle, but a lot of different shuttles. President Zelensky then posted on X, I had a productive meeting with Special Envoy Kellogg, a good discussion, many important details. I am grateful to the United States for the assistance and the bipartisan support for Ukraine and the Ukrainian people. It is important for us and for the entire free world that American strength is felt. We had a detailed discussion about the battlefield situation. You should know General Kellogg is a combat veteran of Vietnam, and of Desert Storm, I believe, knows warfare completely well. How to return our prisoners of war. That's new, that's interesting, and effective security guarantees. From the very first second of this war, Ukraine has sought peace. We must and can ensure that peace is strong and lasting so that Russia can never return with war. Ukraine is ready for a strong, effective investment and security agreement with the President of the United States. We have proposed the fastest and most constructive way to achieve results. Our team is ready to work 24/7. Success unites us all. Strong Ukraine-U.S. relations benefit the entire world. I thank General Kellogg for the joint work to achieve important results. Now, Trump critics aren't going to pay any attention to that. I got 2 messages last night and one today from longtime friends, both of whom really dislike Trump, both of whom are off the rails on understanding what's going on with Ukraine and Trump, and the fact that posts are not deals and deals are not unveiled until they're done. So we just have to be patient. Now, I want to play for you a guy who's not only not up on details, but is prone to conspiracy theorists. The worst senator in the United States Senate. Many of you think it's Mazie Hirono. It's not. We know she doesn't know what she's talking about, from Hawaii. But it's Sheldon Whitehouse from Rhode Island, which really shouldn't have 2 senators anyway. Cut number 14.
Judiciary Committee what crimes it was that he was concerned about that caused him to plead the Fifth. Kash Patel, mark my words, will cause evil in this building behind us, and Republicans who vote for him will rue that day.
You know, I don't think we will. Kash Patel is now Director Patel to you, Sheldon, and you should leave the all-white club that you belong to in Rhode Island and stop lecturing us about our first director of the Bureau, who is not a white male, with whom you are comfortable. I wonder if Kash can get into your club in Rhode Island. I don't know. Sheldon White House deals in conspiracies, dark money conspiracies. He's attacked the Supreme Court. He's incited violence, in my opinion, against the Supreme Court. He and Chuck Schumer really don't like him. He's not very smart. He's prone to falling for anything, and he goes out and says ridiculous things like that. We don't need to listen to him. Time for me to tell you about AndrewandTodd.com. If you're going to buy a home, do it with AndrewandTodd.com because they're lenders. They are not brokers. They're with Sierra Pacific Mortgage, a bank. They make loans. They underwrite the loans. So if you need to buy a house, let's say you're being moved by your company, or you have decided to move out of California and go someplace that's sane, or you are in the military and you have to make a move because you got orders. If you're going to sell your house and buy a house, it's complicated. Better to have a pro, better to have Andrew Del Rey and or Todd Avakian working your file. They've been doing this for decades and decades. You can call them at 888-888-1172. 888-888-1172. No matter what you need. If you're a veteran, you don't want to put any money down. You're a first-time home buyer, you want to use an FHA mortgage. You just want to do a mortgage. And maybe you want to do 15 years or 20 years, or maybe you want a 30-year fixed rate, or maybe you want an adjustable. You might even want a home equity line of credit. HELOCs are back. The best rate you're going to get in almost every case is going to be with AndrewandTodd.com. Not always, but I think in almost every case, and they do business everywhere. What's really great about them is it doesn't matter your age, your demo, your credit rating. They'll work with you. They're not going to put you into a bad loan. They're not going to let you buy too much house. They talk turkey with you. They make sure you know what every cost is along the way and what the advantages of A versus B. If you're a senior citizen, 62 years and older, and living in your primary residence, this is tricky, called a reverse mortgage. You don't actually make another payment on your house. They take an amount of equity out of your house. They charge you interest on it, but that money goes into your bank account where it should make at least 4% a year. And you should be able to keep up with the market with some wise, and they have a list of investment advisors as well at AndrewandTodd.com. They got realtors like Gordon Wood in Beltway. They've got all sorts of wonderful people all over the country who will help you find a house or help you manage your money if you're doing a reverse mortgage. Whatever it is that you need, Andrew and Todd have helped thousands of people listen to the Hugh Hewitt Show, and you should let them help you too. AndrewandTodd.com, 888-888-1172. That's 888-888-1172. Israel has cities which, like every city in the United States, have bus programs. In the city of Bat Yam in central Israel, 3 buses blew up today in the parking lot. They had finished their runs, and they were parked in the garage lot. Police arrived, bomb detection. There were 2 more bombs on 2 more buses. So a terrorist or terrorists actually attempted to blow up 5 buses in Bat Yam today. No one was injured. Kind of a miracle. The Tel Aviv police commissioner says that those buses were sabotaged by a terrorist operating out of the West Bank. So I expect there will be follow-up in the course of the program. I'll bring it to you as we get that. Vice President Vance went to CPAC today, sat down with Mercedes Schlapp. I want to play as much of this as possible for you. Cut number 1, the Vice President with Mercedes Schlapp at CPAC.
Everything the president has done on the border, we have got to empower him to do it, not just for a month, but for the next 4 years. And we've got to hire more Border Patrol agents. We got to give Tom Homan and Stephen Miller and Kristi Noem the resources they need to secure the border. And just not to return to the border, but I think so many of our issues come back to the border, because if you take 30, 40 million illegal aliens, you take Medicare fraud, Social Security fraud. Why are we taking the people's Social Security payments and giving it to illegal aliens? We know that's happening in the United States of America today. We've got to stop it. If you get control of the border, Mercedes, you do more to control the fiscal problem, the financial problems that we have in this country than almost anything. Get illegal aliens out of our country, make sure American tax dollars go to American people. That is how you solve the fiscal crisis in the United States of America.
Did you notice he used the number 30 to 40 million illegal immigrants? That's double the legacy media's grudging acknowledgement of 20 million illegal immigrants. 30 to 40 million illegal immigrants means 10% of our population or more are not here with invitation. Some of those are visa overstays. Some of those are sending remittances back, and they're merely day laborers, and they're trying to get by. They're economic migrants. We've had that for as long as I've been alive. But a lot of them do not come from Mexico and don't go back and forth as the season change. A lot of them intend to stay, and America isn't prepared to absorb 30 to 40 million people. Cut number 2 of the vice president at CPAC with Mercedes Schlapp.
So, look, the greatest threat in Europe, and I'd say it was the greatest threat in the United States until about 30 days ago, is that you've had the leaders of the West decide that they should send millions and millions of unvetted foreign migrants into their countries. That is the biggest threat to Europe. And frankly, it remains, by the way, the biggest threat to the United States because, yes, we've got 4 years of President Trump's leadership, but I guarantee you, if the Democrats ever get power again, they're going to try to do it again. We cannot rebuild Western civilization. We cannot rebuild the United States of America or Europe by letting millions and millions of unvetted illegal migrants come into our country. It has to stop. Thank God it stopped here, but it's got to stop there. And a related issue, Mercedes, is you can't just stop it. You have to allow European peoples, and of course the American people too, to raise issues about it.
Right.
You have to allow free speech to debate this stuff. You have to stop doing things to the populations of the world. You've got to give the populations of the world the opportunity to speak up and say, no more of this BS. We want borders. We want sovereignty. We want to be able to speak our own mind in our own country. And I guarantee you, if we don't allow free speech, and of course, the Biden administration, I made this point, Mercedes, the Biden administration did more to destroy free speech, not just in the United States, but that is the future for our shared civilization.
And then cut number 6 on Christian faith in the public life.
First is, I believe, like the fundamental tenet of the Christian faith, it's not just a set of good moral principles, though it is that. I think the fundamental tenet of our faith is that the Son of God became man, he died, and then he raised himself from the dead. That is the fundamental tenet of the Christian faith, and I think so much flows from that. And I think one lesson that flows from that is that we shouldn't fear death. Of course, death is a very bad thing, but there are much more terrible things than just losing one's life, and importantly, you could lose one's soul. And I think whether it's fighting for the unborn or fighting for peace and security for our citizens, I want us to be the kind of society where my kids can grow up to be virtuous young people, can be good young Christians, of course, because that's what I'm trying to raise them to be, and that's what our public policy is trying to do. Creating the space where moms and dads can raise their children in their faith to become good young people who believe the things that I do. That is what I'm trying to create, is the space for you, of course, to raise your children as you see fit, but the space for me to raise my kids to be the kind of young people that I think they ought to be. And the other thing that I take from it, Mercedes, is if you look at the long history of the Christian faith, we've been around for about 2,000 years now, give or take a few years, and there have been really dark times in the history of the Christian faith. There have been really good times in the history of the Christian faith. And I just try to remind myself that we put our faith in God above, we put our faith in the grace of God, and we try the best to do His will and we don't worry so much about whether we're going to have earthly rewards. We worry about whether we're doing right by God Almighty above. That's what I try to do, and that's how I try to run my life in public.
Do you know, I don't think I've heard an American elected official speak that candidly about their personal faith since Jimmy Carter. W was by any measure a very convicted Christian. And he would allude to and use the rhythm and the phrases of Scripture, and they often resonated. And if you knew the language, you knew the references. And he would, of course, say, I'm an evangelical Christian. But I haven't heard anyone do that in a long time. And I think that is necessary and good, unqualifiedly good. J.D. Vance, the vice president, was at the Conservative Political Action Committee meeting today talking with Mercedes Schlapp in a long interview. Here is cut number 8, where the vice president lays out what is his overarching public policy goal.
I guess my message to young people generally is we're trying to make your life better. And that is the simple thrust of President Trump's policy is we want you to be able to buy a home. We want you to be able to work a good job. We want you to be able to raise your kids, like I said, according to the values that you believe in. And we want you to be able to build a nice life in this country that all of us love. That is what we're trying to do. And, you know, you guys more than anybody, more than me, I'm talking about people under the age of 30 in particular, you guys are going to have to deal with the consequences of good policy or of bad policy for much longer than the rest of us. And I want you guys to think about the future and ask yourself, do you want safe communities? Do you want a prosperous life? Do you want to be able to work a good job? Or do you want that job shipped off to China or somewhere else? We're fighting for you every single day. We want you to help fight for us because we've got to win. Not just the policy battles of the next couple of months. We've got to win the midterm elections in a couple of years. We need you. We recognize that we need you, and we're fighting for you every single day. And I think, you know, you asked me, you know, my message to young men is I think that our culture sends a message to young men that you should suppress every masculine urge. You should try to cast aside your family. You should try to suppress what makes you a young man in the first place. And I think that my message to young men is don't allow this broken culture to send you a message that you're a bad person because you're a man, because you like to tell a joke, because you like to have a beer with your friends, or because you're competitive. It's...
That's controversial. I don't know why that's controversial. I thought he was about to say, and you should join the Marines like I did when I was just getting out of high school and wasn't really clued in on how the world worked because I had a kind of crazy upbringing. Hillbilly Elegy remains very much the decoder ring for J.D. Vance. And if you just put in there and go join the Marines or the Army or the Navy or the Air Force or the Space Force, I would have applauded because that's actually the best route for most 18-year-old men who are not going to go to college. The very best thing they can do, because they might want to go to college afterwards, and the VA bill will pay for that if you go do your 4 years in any of the services. But I think the vice president, who's himself a Marine, would be quick to say it wasn't fun, it wasn't easy, Paris Island is difficult, but I didn't buy a car at 25% interest because I had a gunny sergeant who said, no, you dummy, Corporal, take this guy down and buy a car. And they taught him basic finance. He should have just added it there. Next time I talk to him, I'm going to ask him about that. Not for everyone, obviously, but it's for more people than you might think. If you want to know why I'm opening up with Tony Orlando, you're going to have to listen to the 500th episode of the Ruthless podcast, which debuted this morning. Josh Holmes is the ringmaster of the fellas. Josh, I had an 8:15 doctor's appointment this morning. I'm in California. And I listened for a 40-minute drive. I did not stop laughing. It is a fabulous episode. I'm sorry that you will never play Augusta. It's not working again, Josh. Josh doesn't do anything. He's not a producer. We're blaming Spaghettis for this.
This is we gotta blame Spaghettis for this. Spaghettis, are we not? Are we transmitting at this point? What's going on?
I can hear him now.
You got me?
I got you now. So we're just going to pick up and tell people that you actually began Ruthless without a producer, and apparently you've reverted.
Yeah, no. Listen, we have a little bit of technical difficulties here, Hugh. I don't know what's going on, but I do appreciate you and all of your audience for having us. You're a big part of the reason why we could do 500 episodes of Ruthless.
This was a hilarious episode, but I want to stop and say 500 episodes. Cy Young threw 511 wins. No one else got over 500. I'm sure there are other people with 500 episodes of a podcast, but I doubt they've all been funny. And how much producing went into this one?
Well, to be honest with you, the beauty of what our show has been, and I mean, you've been with us for a long haul, is it's basically authentic. It's a bunch of buddies hanging out talking about what we would talk about, but we just added some friends along the way. In our 500th, we brought in a whole bunch of familiar names, people that'll be very familiar to the Hugh Hewitt audience.
It was an all-star game. It was an all-star game.
It could not have been more fun. We had a blast. Everybody was having a good time. An open venue. I mean, Hugh, when you do something live and you get to feel the crowd, man, it's an awesome experience.
I love the question about your wardrobe and the fact that you, like me, do not dress yourself. It's up to your wife. And so I was very appreciative to know that that's not just a me thing. But I was a little bit surprised at your selection of the band. I've always kind of thought of the fellas as the Beatles, and I wonder who's going to show up with their Yoko Ono someday and break up the band. I think you might have hit your White Album today.
Yeah, well, you've asked me about the Yoko thing before. We've always said Smug is suspect when it comes to being the Yoko of the group. But the band is a band that every artist of their era came and played with. And that's kind of how we see Ruthless, is that if you're a part of conservative media, come on board and play your greatest hits. We'll play along with it, and everybody can have a good time. And it's like a rising tide lifts all boats. Speaking of greatest hits, you have on Senator Kennedy, Senator Cotton, and Governor Kemp. Do they have writers' rooms? They are legit funny people. Right? It's funny because everybody thinks of Cotton as so serious, right? He's so serious. He's by the fact. But if you know Tom, as I know you do very well, he's hilarious. And he's got a great sense of humor. Everybody knows Kennedy, right? And Kemp is someone who is just the most down-to-earth. I mean, if you were to depict a person you wanted to sit at the bar with and tell stories and jokes with, this is the guy. I know him the least, but I happen to have Tom Cotton's brand new book back here, 7 Things You Can't Say About China, because I think we're actually all endorsed by Tom Cotton. We got to be nice to his book. I want to focus on something you said that nobody believes except you and me and the other guys on Fellows and a few other people, which is the conservative ecosystem does not compete against itself. It competes against legacy media, and your guys' mission is to grow the ecosystem, and you're doing it fabulously well. That's it. Well, look, I mean, you are the standard bearer on that, Hugh, but our view has always been that the mainstream media, the corporate media is broken and broken probably forever. And the question is, where's your information flow come from? And the more that you can get smart, intellectual, experienced voices who you can have some fun with in the process into the ecosystem, the more information it's going to get out there, the better educated the American public is. And ultimately, that's good for everybody. And so, yeah, we've always seen ourselves as a facilitator of information we can have some fun with, rather than somebody who's competing against somebody who could say was in your lane. Let me say a disclaimer for the benefit of people who are older than I am or perhaps used to FCC guidelines. Ruthless is not for people who only do PG-13. That's right. That's right. It was an armada of F-bombs today. It's just like basically carpet bombing the program because it was funny and it was appropriate, but I want to let that know. Did you really not have a producer? I've never had a producer. I've had Dwayne, but I've never had a producer. Did Michael Duncan have to learn about audio gates? Yeah, no, we literally started, and Duncan and Ashbrook were trying to literally Googling how you cut audio and how you get it up for a podcast. I mean, honestly, that in and of itself should have been a reality show. It's the funniest stuff you've ever seen. Complete catastrophe every Tuesday and Thursday, but they somehow got it done. And, here we are. I'm going to go serious on you in a moment, but I got to ask about Dem or Journo. Yeah. Now, I love King of the Hill. That's my favorite game.
But
Yeah.
today's edition of Dem or Journo, I was glued. Mary Catherine was wrong. You were wrong.
Totally.
Everybody was wrong except, of course, Smug.
Yeah. Well, this is the game in which you try to identify the difference between a Democratic operative and journalists who are like mainstream, quote unquote, publications. And there are always kind of weasel words that they get in there and phrases that they give themselves away that you really have to hunt for. But honestly, Hugh, it's gotten harder and harder. This is the hardest game we play.
I went for the Marshalls. I was wrong. I was wrong.
Right.
So I was following Mary Catherine Hamsley because she's pretty smart, but she was reluctant to play. Where was the venue for the live event?
We were at Pearl Street Warehouse down in the Wharf in D.C. An old friend owns that joint, has been great. Put our first show ever. It was kind of like, when a musical artist goes back to like the first place they ever played. That's kind of what 500 was for us. And it was an absolute blast.
There is some deep lore in this episode as well. Deep lore. And the deep lore is like the Silmarillion for Tolkien fans. You don't understand it unless you've read the whole book the first time. How often do you drop the veil on the deep lore?
Well, at some point we feel like we need to put out a glossary or something, Hugh. It's like if you haven't been along for the ride for a little while, you may get lost a little bit, but we catch people up a little bit over time, and we try to put things in context. Like we explain King of the Hill, right? These are former conservatives who Trump broke their brain, and we play a game where we read their hottest takes over the course of a week. We try to update the listener on a relatively frequent basis so they know why it is that we're choosing the competitors that we're choosing.
Do you think Sherry My Sherry is trying to win every week now? I have a suspicion that you provide the only attention she gets, and that therefore she keeps amping it up in order to win.
Hugh, you might be onto something. Last night, she's been on a 4-week heater, right?
Oh,
and
yeah.
So we're choosing, these are the craziest takes on the internet, and when she's on her A game, she cannot be defeated. I happen to land on Sherry My Sherry. I've been playing her as the champion for 4 straight weeks, but the heat that she brought last week, you got to tune into Ruthless to listen to, because you will not actually believe it.
I was at the top of a big hill, about 6.5 miles into an 11 thing, and I hear, you got to kill your friends. I just stop because, okay, now let's get to humor, to the source of humor. Ruthless is funny. It's always funny. It's sometimes purple, and that's okay. It's like watching a comedy show. If you go to a comedy store, don't expect grandma.
Yeah.
But is that ever fall flat? Do you guys ever have a bad show?
I'm sure we've done shows that are less than our best stuff. But what you get with us is the authenticity of it, right? It's not a production. It's not we don't have cues where we make jokes. It's who we are. And it's kind of like when you hang out with your friends, some jokes are better than others. Some discussions are better than others. Sometimes you have arguments amongst each other. But that's what you get with us, is that we just have a commentary on the events of the day. And more likely than not, we end up making fun of stuff and people and it just is what it is, Hugh. And for us, we don't even think about it like this was really great or this was really it just is what it is. This is us, and fortunately there have been a few million people that agree with it.
Well, you got the plaque, and you beat me to. I brought this up to Senator Cruz earlier in the program because he's at 271,000. He must have 2 plaques. But did Smug really take it home with him?
Oh, yeah. No, that we promised that if we got a plaque, it was going on Smug's mantle. Listen, he's very proud of this thing, Hugh. I don't want to denigrate any of this. He's very proud of a plaque from YouTube saying that we have 100,000 subscribers. The first thing, the most important thing we could do was put a crown on his head, a scepter in his hand, a robe around his back, and hand him the plaque.
Uneasy lies the head that wears the crown. You might want to remind. I'm coming right back with Josh Holmes. Don't go anywhere. I'm going to segment this out so everybody in the Hugh Hewitt audience knows to like and subscribe if you wish to opine, or if you just want to have. Today is a lot of laughs. Their 500th edition today. I began the show by saying it's a particularly grim day in Israel and around the world among civilized people, because the bodies were returned to Israel of Sherry, Ariel, and Kafir Bibas, and of Oded Lifshitz. I'm joined by Josh Kroshauer. Josh, this was a pretty horrific and macabre scene this morning. Does that, in your mind, make a phase 2 extremely unlikely? Even though there are at least 30 hostages alive, and maybe 5 Americans: Eden Alexander Tayshen, Gadi Hagai, Judy Weinstein Hagai, and Omer Nutra. We don't know what happened to them, so there's still Americans there and 25 Israelis. But I don't know how phase 2 happens after today.
What it makes very hard to imagine is that you can't look at the Palestinian polity in Gaza. I mean, watching the macabre images of the bodies of the Bibas family being cheered on by not just the Hamas terrorists who were parading these coffins on stage, but in front of the children and young people, civilians watching, and I've never it makes you sick to your stomach, Hugh, that the arrangement of a polity. This isn't just Hamas and like a terrorist that's usurping this territory. This is the views of many people who live in Gaza, and it's sort of this is why the notion of the two-state solution or a Palestinian state is so unthinkable, even to a lot of the progressive-minded people in Israel who had been championing such a notion a decade or so ago. But when you see a civilization that's just that decrepit and that cheers the wanton slaughter of mothers, children, the elderly, what happened? What I mean, it's like a Sodom and Gomorrah biblical story. Like, how many good people are left in Gaza? It's a very hard thing for anyone who has a moral conscience, but certainly in Israel, the notion that Hamas can still be left in control of that territory, but who could govern that territory, and how long it's going to take to really de-radicalize such a corrupted place.
I don't know that it's possible. The dignified transfer of remains ceremony is among the most somber that Americans have seen way too often in the last 20 years since the attack on 9/11. And we've seen a lot of soldiers come back, but it's always the dignified transfer of remains. This is the opposite. It's cruel, it's inhuman, it's barbaric. It's sort of pagan, and it's not anything I would associate with Islam, although they are defining Islamists to a whole new level of degradation.
Well, Hugh, we know in this country that the beliefs of radical Islam we lived it on 9/11. I mean, this is the same type of people. We went to war to fight back against that type of extremism. It doesn't represent all of Islam, but it certainly, the fact that not enough people in the West, Hugh, are speaking out. And I think a lot of people think Hamas is sort of this like ISIS-like group that is distinct entirely from the Palestinians. I mean, Hamas was elected in 2006, and has, if you believe some of the sparse number of quality polls that are taken in Gaza and in the West Bank, has a pretty sizable share of support among the Palestinian population. And the terrorism on October 7th is far too many Palestinians support it, and that's an uncomfortable reality to deal with. So I think a lot of people in the West think that this is just sort of some foreign entity that all you have to do is kind of push it aside. But the reality is it has a lot of, or just too much support, and the process to de-radicalize and to kind of make the changes necessary to have peace will take at least a generation. It's not something you can just have some diplomatic conversations and it can be dealt with.
No, it's a metastasizing cancer, and it's a deadly one. I have a hierarchy of musts, Josh. Putin is evil, but Russia actually cannot be defeated. Hamas is evil and has to be defeated. Iran is evil and could be defeated. China is evil and our greatest adversary and can't be defeated. Do you agree with my 4 big enemies list and what can happen and not happen?
I like it. I have to think about it a little more deeply, but I think it really lays out sort of the challenges on the national security front and the international stage that we're dealing with. I mean, as far as Hamas goes, the best solution, and I think because Trump sort of put something that I don't think is going to happen, but the Arab states are trying to find some middle ground to kind of to the president's liking, to the administration's liking. I think the best option would be to have some kind of Arab stewardship over the territory and try to take out Hamas, but also have some kind of you mentioned like cancer, like some kind of like chemotherapy in the long term to ensure that We're not going to see anything like October 7th again, but it's not going to be easy. And again, the Arab states have as much concern about the Gazan population as do the Israelis. That's why Jordan and Egypt don't want to take in refugees, and they haven't been wanting to take refugees in even well before October 7th.
So I was listening to the commentary pod this morning, and the number 70% of Israelis want all the hostages back. That's not possible to equate with the defeat of Hamas. When we defeated Imperial Japan, it took 2 atomic weapons. When the Soviets took Berlin, it was the most savage occupation of an enemy, and we don't want anything like that to happen, as when the Soviets rolled into Berlin and just slaughtered people left and right, and Hitler killed himself in the bunker. But we did go after ISIS pretty heavy, and Mosul was a rubble and a ruin, and a lot of innocent people died. The innocence question has gone down appreciably, although we don't know who's got a gun at their back for those celebrations. But does Israel really think 70% think there's a way out of this other than back in and kill them?
Well, I mean, the public opinion, as you note, Hugh, is pretty strongly in favor of getting the hostages out, the ones that are living, get everyone out, and then deal with the consequences later, even though that's very uncomfortable and it could lead to more deaths in the future if you still have to keep dealing with Hamas. I mean, I think a lot of the Israeli military successes, including against Hamas, like taking out its leadership, taking out a lot of terrorists, had an impact. But then again, you have to look at how many serious terrorists were released from Israeli prisons as part of these negotiations as well. But politically in Israel, and this is Netanyahu. No, I mean, this is the pressure that Netanyahu is under on a political sense of, from a political perspective. 70% or so want the deal to continue and all the hostages to come home. But the coalition partners of Netanyahu are the 30%, and some of them are most vocally against that. And if Bibi goes too far, his own government could end up collapsing politically. So he's trying to thread this needle. It's been very difficult. And frankly, Hugh, there's no good answers. There's no good solutions, and it's always most politically difficult when either way is not going to be good, and it's not going to offer sustenance to the Israeli people.
Well, it's an awful day, and I do not envy you your work today, Josh Kroshauer. Follow Josh at Jewish Insider, Jewish_Insider, or at Josh Kroshauer on X. Read his work, read the work of his excellent staff in a very grim day for the civilized world, but especially for Israel and American Jewry. Just awful. Thank you, Josh. Markets have closed for the day, so I want to bring you the market update brought to us by AmericanFederal.com, 1-800-221-7694. More on American Federal in a moment. The Dow was down 1% today. The S&P was down 0.43%. The NASDAQ was down 0.47%. And gold went up to $2,954 an ounce. I opened up the email during the break and saw an email from Nick Grovich, which I'm sure goes to every customer of American Federal as I am. And it reads, in part, only a week ago, Nick says, I sent an email telling you that gold is likely to continue its record-breaking rise. I mentioned that premiums were at an all-time low, lower than I have seen them in 45 years. The premium is, of course, the commission that you pay on the gold. As demand starts to pick up, premiums are going to go up, and they are doing just that. They have gone up 1.74% in the past week. The premium is the out-the-door price. Your premium is what gold or silver cost above the spot price of the metal. This week, the premium on gold eagles jumped $50 from last week's price. Not a lot of money, considering eagles cost over $3,000. However, it does show that the trend may be changing. That means premiums will very likely rise another $80 to $100 as prices normalize. So I go down a little bit and note that Nick always provides an update from history. Last year, gold acted the same as it is now. Massive selling by individuals in the first 2 months of the year, followed by historic gains starting soon thereafter. We can't be sure about that, but Nick's been doing this for 45 years. If the same thing happens this year, we will see $3,500 or higher gold prices per ounce. I have dozens, if not hundreds, of clients who have been waiting for a big dip in gold for the past 1 to 2 years. They have completely missed the move. I get it. They missed buying at $1,800, then again at $2,000 and $2,400 an ounce gold, and are having a hard time now at $2,950. One client wanted to buy 1 million when gold was under 1,800, but just couldn't find the right timing. He overthought the whole thing and missed out on a 50% profit. That's over $550,000 he missed out on. See, Nick deals with small-time buyers like me and with big-time buyers. But if you want the newsletter, it's much too long to read. Go to AmericanFederal.com and ask for it. If you're going to buy gold, do it from Nick and his team. If you're going to buy silver, which I think is at $33 an ounce, I don't really pay much attention to the silver market, but I pay attention to the gold market. And there will be days when it goes down. It could reset. I don't know. Nick doesn't know. Nobody knows. But boy, I trust people who have been doing it for 45 years. I do trust Nick Grovich. 1-800-221-7694. Now, I want to go back to J.D. Vance and his speech. Actually, it's an interview with Mercedes Schlapp, who's co-chair of the Conservative Political Action Committee. Cut number 3, J.D. Vance this morning.
But we've got to do some basic things, Mercedes. One, like I said, we've got to continue to unleash American energy. That's part of the reconciliation bill. We've got to make sure that other countries stop taking advantage of us. That's a big part of President Trump's tariff policy, is we got to stop being taken advantage of. Of course, we want to make the President Trump tax cuts permanent and extend them into the future. We want no taxes on tips. We got to do some of the things we talked about during the campaign.
Okay, then a fun line, cut number 4.
Speaking of the press, I do think that we've had maybe more executive orders than CNN has viewers each night. So hello to our friends at CNN.
Ouch, but it's true. Cut number 5.
Well, it's been 6 days. What have you guys done to fix the inflation crisis created by Joe Biden? I'm like, well, first of all, it's been 6 days. We've done a lot in 6 days, but it's going to take some time to fix what Joe Biden broke over 4 years. And we know it is easy, unfortunately, to burn the house down. It takes a little bit of time to build it back up. And here's what we have to do. Because, look, the fundamental goal of our immigration policy, of our border policy, of DOGE saving taxpayer money, the fundamental goal is we want your children and grandchildren to be able to raise a family in security and comfort in the country that we all love. That is the whole goal of President Trump's agenda.
More on that when we come back. Don't go anywhere except over to my YouTube channel. I'm going to post both parts of my interview with Josh Holmes on this, the 500th episode of the Ruthless podcast. I'm going to post part 5 of my interview with Senator Tom Cotton about the book over my shoulder here, 7 Things You Can't Say About China. I'm very glad that 7 Things You Can't Say About China is in the top 10 at Amazon. It was up at number 3 yesterday. I don't check it that often, but that means Senator Cotton hit the mark. He wrote a book for the average American to understand why China is such an existential threat to the United States. Go out and get it. Get it for yourself. Get it for your friends. Make it your Book of the Month club if you're in a book club. Seth Mandel joins me, writer for Commentary, contributor to the Commentary podcast, the author of an essay yesterday, The Meaning of Kafir Bibas, which is just heartrending. It was read on the Commentary podcast this morning by John Podhoretz. Seth, I don't know if you know that. Barry Weiss has talked about it. It's a unfortunately necessary and very somber look at what has happened. Kafir, Ariel, and Shiri were murdered. Oded Lifshitz was murdered. Their bodies came back, but there are 5 Americans who might still be there. Idan Alexander, Iten Chen, Gadi Haggai, Judy Weinstein Haggai, and Omer Nutra. What do we do?
Yeah, that's the question. What do we do? The Idan Alexander, we know we have recently gotten signs of life from him. And so there is an American still alive. And as far as the way Trump has handled this so far, I think it's very clear that he's going to want him out. And it's slated for the second round of this ceasefire. But Trump is getting impatient. Steve Witkoff is getting impatient. And at the moment, certainly Israelis have no patience left after what they saw today. So I know that Hamas is trying to speed up the second round and offering to release everybody and everything they have, but that would be in return for Israel permanently exiting every inch of the Gaza Strip and essentially saying Hamas will stay in power. So Hamas is saying we'll do everything right away if you guarantee that we get to stay in power.
Now, Seth, that can't happen. And I remind people, when the Soviets took Berlin, it was leveled. When the United States invaded Japan, it was leveled. When the United States did away with our allies with ISIS, Mosul was leveled. There's really no way to get rid of Hamas in phase two. That's why I don't think we're going to have phase two. Do you?
I don't know. It's looking less likely from the Israeli perspective. You would think it would be less likely. The fact that they still have an American who is alive means that Trump's wishes here are worth a lot. They factor in, they're a major factor of what happens next. So I think it's almost, in a way, almost going to be up to the American president, as strange as that sounds. But, Israelis are very supportive of the hostage deals and bringing their family members home, dead or alive. But they want to bring everybody home, and they've been saying it. And so I think that there are some headwinds that Bibi Netanyahu would face if he, if he wasn't able to negotiate at least some sort of further round of this stuff. In the past, basically these ceasefires go until Hamas screws up. Hamas breaks the ceasefire. I mean, literally every single ceasefire is, Hamas flirted with it the other day with a rocket. There were coordinated bus bombings today in Israel. Nobody was hurt because the bombs, five, that's right, were mistimed to go off tomorrow. It's now nighttime there. But people were on one of the buses at least, and a person actually discovered it. She saw a suspicious package and said something, and it turned out to be one of the bombs. So it was very lucky that nothing happened. But it sounds like Hamas is, what we've seen so far, the reporting says Hamas has hinted that the bombs are theirs. So they generally try to, to end these ceasefires and violate these ceasefires every time. And Israel kind of has to decide at what point it's being pushed too far. And I think that Bibi will face headwinds if there's any sort of perception that a deal is on the table and it's Israel that is the reason it's ending and not Hamas.
Seth, do you think it's possible? Because I do. At President Trump, I've interviewed him 30 times, thrown questions at him 30 times. He is a visual learner, and he reacts very negatively towards cruelty, especially directed at children and younger people. It's almost automatic. The Syrian response, the response to Hamas. I think if he sees tape of what happened this morning, he's going to revert to everyone out now or all hell breaks loose. That's what I think. Do you agree?
I do. Yeah, I've seen reporting today, but I haven't seen it myself. But I've heard there's reporting today that he did see them and was very upset by them. And I would be surprised if the day ended without him seeing that. But yeah, I would think that he would be furious upon seeing that. And he said last time, all hell will break loose if they continue this. And today's Hamas behavior was worse, I think, than anything we've seen.
It's the most gruesome thing since 10/7.
It was a slap. It was a slap in the face of everybody, Trump included, and he doesn't take well to that.
No. Now, I've been listening to commentary. I'm trying to come up with a construct that I think will work. I want to test it on you, Seth. Putin is evil, but Russia can't be defeated. Hamas is evil and must be defeated. Iran is evil and could be defeated. And China is our greatest threat and evil, and we must make it our priority. Is that a fair statement of your understanding of the world?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, all of those depend on, what the devil's in the details.
We're not going to defeat Russia. So we need a deal that keeps Ukraine standing, but we could defeat Hamas. I mean, we actually could help Israel remove Hamas from Gaza.
Yes, and Iran is the only thing it has left is its nuclear program, and its air defenses are down. So Iran is the sort of thing that you could do in a night if America got bored.
Do you think Americans or Trump in particular connect Iran with that gruesome display today?
Yes.
Good.
Yeah, I do. I don't think they did in the past. I think it was harder, but ever since the Clinton administration, victims of terrorism, remember, have been suing Iran in court. Victims of Palestinian terrorism, even in Gaza, have been suing Iran and winning cases. Iran doesn't ever fork anything over. But I think by now, yeah, I really do think they make the connection.
I hope that gets through. I think there's shuttles diplomacy going on. Rubio, Waltz, and Whitcliffe here, General Kellogg and J.D. Vance there. But I hope it all comes together and that Hamas is defeated. A fine bit of writing, Seth, The Meaning of Kafir Bibas. I recommend it to everyone. I'll put it in the show notes today over at YouTube. Thank you for joining me. Vice President J.D. Vance had a wide-ranging conversation at the Conservative Political Action Committee gathering today in Washington, D.C. with Mercedes Schlapp. Here's cut number 7 of the Vice President.
But the best advice she gave me when it came to politics is don't let them filter you. And in politics, you've got consultants, and you've got media professionals, you've got pollsters, you've got a lot of people who try to tell you what to say or how to behave or, what to do. And Usha just said, just be yourself, be authentic, go out there and say what's actually on your mind, maybe a little nicer from time to time. But I think that's the best advice that she gave me, and that's why we take our kids everywhere, and that's why I'm not afraid to make a joke on social media, even if it's sometimes a dad joke. I forgive me, all of you who don't like dad jokes, but you just got to be yourself. Yeah. And I think that's President Trump's superpower in American politics, and that's probably the best advice Usha ever gave me, at least on politics.
I think that's the best advice for anyone in the public eye, including journalism. And I want to add the Hewitt corollary. If you don't know the answer, don't pretend. Say, I don't know. And so I've seen the Vice President as just J.D. Vance, as Senator Vance, and now as Vice President Vance, same guy, same approach, candid, direct, refreshing. And I like our bench. I have been around long enough. I've seen a lot of false starts. There was a time when the young guns were Paul Ryan, Eric Cantor, and Kevin McCarthy. They're all doing great. They were all good for the party. They all did different things. Well, the bench now is J.D. Vance, Tom Cotton, Elise Stefanik. It's a different bench. It's a really great bench. We got a lot of great people. Pete Hegseth is on that bench, too. There are a lot of great people. Kash Patel's on that bench. So even if I go a decade longer at this, I'm not gonna leave worrying that there isn't anyone rising up through the Republican ranks who can lead from the front. We got lots of those. Over the last 48 hours, a great deal has happened on various international fronts concerning the United States. There are a lot of pundits and not a few Democrats who would rather see Donald Trump fail in his effort to negotiate a ceasefire between Ukraine and Russia that is acceptable to Ukraine than succeed. And they are eager to drive wedges between President Zelensky and President Trump. And President Zelensky met today with General Kellogg because the shuttles diplomacy continues. By shuttles, I mean we've got J.D. Vance and General Kellogg going to see Zelensky and Europe. We've had Treasury Secretary Bessent go to see President Zelensky. We've had Secretary Rubio, National Security Advisor Waltz, and Special Envoy Witkoff go to see the Saudis and sit across from Lavrov and other Russian representatives of dictator Putin. The framework for any comment has got to be fourfold. So if you're going to comment on one of these four, you really ought to comment on all these four at the same time. Now, I am not a PhD in international studies. I went to the Graduate School of Nixon. So I had Stanley Hoffman as an undergrad. It's a name that some of you will remember if you're old enough. Lefty, smart guy. I read the Melian dialogues in college. Everybody does who studies international affairs. And it's all very well and good. Then I got to go to work for Richard Nixon in 1978 for almost 2 years, writing a book about the then Soviet Union, which included chapters on China and the Middle East. I got to talk to him most days of the week for a couple hours a day and write and go back and forth with him. So my graduate degree is in the Nixon School of Foreign Policy, which is everything is connected, and you'd better be aware of that at all times. There are 3 superpowers on the globe, us, China, and Russia. The worst situation is for China and Russia to be exactly what they are right now, the unlimited partnership. That having been said, here are the 4 principles you ought to take away. Putin is evil. He's a war criminal. But Russia cannot be defeated because Russia is a superpower with thousands of nuclear weapons and now an alliance with North Korea that is providing fresh blood for their over-the-top campaign against Ukraine. Ukraine cannot win. We hope it is not defeated. We are trying to stop the killing, and I am not eager to drive any distance between allies, nor do I think it is wise for anyone to rise to the bait that they think has been thrown out there, because we really don't know what's going on with Putin and what Trump's trying to pull off. We don't. I believe that Rubio and Waltz know. I believe Kellogg knows. I believe that Witkoff knows, and I hope they get it done. That's reality number 1. Reality number 2, Hamas is evil and has to be defeated. They can't stay in Gaza. They can't stay anywhere. And Gaza itself is going to have to be occupied by somebody for a long time. Because if you saw that gruesome spectacle this morning, you realize that what we might have thought was an isolated outbreak of a deeply malign influence on 10/7 is in fact a metastatic kind of cancer for an entire culture. And some of those people no doubt had guns at their back, but it was evil. They have to be defeated. I don't think there's going to be a phase 2. I know, and you should know, that there are probably 30 living hostages, and at least one American, Edon Alexander, is still alive, and we are missing 4 other Americans, Ite Chen, Gadi Haggai, Judy Weinstein Haggai, and Omer Nutra. And we don't have specifics on them. So America has very, very much a stake in this. And if Donald Trump was watching that this morning, he's going to be very angry this afternoon, as should every civilized person. Number 3, Iran is evil and could be defeated by their own people, by American and Israeli jets and maybe UAE jets over Tehran and other nuclear sites. I don't know how long that regime can last if they don't have the IRGC and their nuclear program. We cannot allow to be going nuclear. Everyone has said that, every president for the last 20 years. But Trump means it. And I think Trump will make sure that they don't. And then finally, and most importantly, China is our greatest enemy, our most powerful adversary. And they mean us ill. They want us to be, quote, an island off the edge of the world. The book over my shoulder, Tom Cotton's book, 7 Things You Can't Say About China. I don't often spend that much time with anyone about one book. Normally I'll do 2 segments, maybe 3. I did 7 segments with Senator Cotton. I'm planning them out over the week. But I want to make sure my entire audience knows that this book, look, it's not very long. It's only 183 pages. Well written, concise, the facts. Just the facts, ma'am. It's a Cotton book. And when he's writing about something like China and about how we cannot sleep on that threat, it's important that you understand everything that happens within that construct. Putin is evil. Russia can't be defeated. China is evil. They are our number 1 adversary, our greatest threat. Hamas is evil and has to be defeated. Iran is evil and could be defeated and done so without the commitment of American troops. In that context, there's going to be a huge burst in defense spending. It's coming. It's coming from Roger Wicker. It's coming from the House Armed Services Committee. Ken Calvert chairs the Appropriations Committee, subcommittee of the House Appropriations Committee. It's between $150 and $200 billion, I think. And Pete Hegseth is telling everybody to prepare a budget that cuts 8%. That's not because they're going to give the money back. They're going to reprogram the money. There are some things we need more than other things. Now, I was a little bit alarmed not to see the Columbia-class submarine on the list of must-haves. I was very relieved to see Secretary Hegseth say a lot more is going to go to Indo-PACOM, because that's the theater in which China intends its greatest challenge. And Virginia-class submarines, more of them, more quickly repaired, forward deployed, and a Navy that is up to that challenge. That means cuts in a lot of things, including the civilian workforce, which can't go to nothing. You need a lot of civilians to run the Pentagon. I've only been in the Pentagon 4 times in all these years. It's not a place in which I am comfortable. I know my way around the White House. I know my way around a variety of different agencies, the Department of Interior, OPM, EPA. I don't know my way around the Department of Defense. It's not my strong suit. All I know is how the White House runs national security policy, and they've got an honest broker in National Security Advisor Waltz. They got a great Secretary of State in Rubio. They have a young and energetic Secretary of Defense in Hegseth. Kash Patel's at the FBI. I hope he takes over counterintelligence very quickly and gets them refocused. The same thing that Hegseth is doing at Defense, Patel needs to do at FBI, which is to say, here are our priorities. We're going to do this. We're going to stop anything having to do with politicization. We're going to stop going after our enemies. We're going to stop lawfare against Democrats and Republicans. We're going back to crime fighting, narcotics interdiction, border security. There's a lot of money that Hegseth is looking to help secure the southern border because it's a national security threat. And I heard earlier today, J.D. Vance sit down with Mercedes Schlapp and say, well, listen to what he had to say. Cut number 1.
Everything the president has done on the border, we have got to empower him to do it, not just for a month, but for the next 4 years. And we've got to hire more Border Patrol agents. We got to give Tom Homan and Stephen Miller and Kristi Noem the resources they need to secure the border. And just not to return to the border, but I think so many of our issues come back to the border, because if you take 30, 40 million illegal aliens, you take Medicare fraud, Social Security fraud.
Right,
why are we taking?
I want to underline that. First time I've heard an American official say that we have between 30 and 40 million illegal aliens in the United States. Let's assume a bell curve, which is present in almost every human activity. The 10% worst people are 3 to 4 million people. There are 3 to 4 million people we have to send back to their home. Now, there are 3 to 4 million people who are the best, and we don't want to do that. But the resources have got to go to the Border Patrol. They've got to go to Homeland Security. They've got to go to the DOD. They got to go to Tom Homan. They got to go to whomever is working on that problem and to the facilities to detain people humanely and to detain them for as long as it takes to return them to their country of origin. And the message has gone out, and it's been very effectively delivered from a variety of sources, and repeat 7 times. Don't come here. You're not getting in, and we're going to send you home. I want to start with the Chinese nationals, 50,000 of whom came over the border in the last 2 years of President Biden. We are only beginning to glimpse the catastrophic consequences of an absentee president who is infirm. But we've glimpsed it. We understand it. In the context of that national security square I built for you, it all makes sense. Former United States Senator Jim Talent is chairman of the Leadership Council at the Reagan Institute. He joins me now. Senator, good Thursday to you. How you doing?
Doing fine, you. How are you?
I'm good. I want to test my 4-sided box through which every national security pundit must pass before I listen to him. Four assumptions I've got. I want to see if you share them. 1, Putin is evil, but Russia cannot be defeated. Number 2, Hamas is evil and must be defeated. Number 3, Iran is evil and could be defeated. Number 4, China is our deadliest threat, cannot be defeated, but can be deterred, and that has to be our priority. What do you say?
Yeah, yes, without qualification to 2, 3, and 4. Could Russia be defeated? Russia, there are certain areas where Russia is pretty sophisticated in its technology and its abilities, although we're beginning to call that into question. I mean, their anti-aircraft defense systems did not protect Iran, from Israel's surgical strikes. But let's put it this way. We can't defeat Russia without engaging in an effort we don't want to engage in, but they certainly can be deterred and contained.
Yes. Now, my corollary number 1 to those 4 principles is that it's Europe's primary job to contain Putin. We have to go contain China, and Europe has to step up like Poland has, like others have, like Ukraine has. They have to deter Putin. Is that fair?
It's certainly fair. It's a position that every American president's had for the last 20 years, that they're not doing enough for their own defense. But again, I would not treat this like it's some enormous exercise. I mean, in the studies I saw, and it was a few years ago, I'll agree, 5 or 6 brigades, including several hundred tanks, in a base in Eastern Europe with the supporting infrastructure and with the air power, so you're talking 25 to 30,000 men, would deter Putin from any kind of a direct attack in the Balkans or the other places where he's threatened it. So could the Europeans do that? Sure. And they would need our leadership, our logistics, probably an American commander, and we would need to train in terms of interoperability and jointness and all the rest of it. But yeah, that could be done, and they ought to do it. And it would be better for them to do it. And they're bragging all the time about how they want to do it. They just don't do it.
They just don't. Finland does it. Sweden does it. Poland does it. They're the big 3. And England and France are nuclear powers, so they have a little pop that other people don't have. Germany's really the weak sister here. And I don't know how I read a long piece by Michael Lind today about their lost decade of economic activity. Merkel turns out to have been a disaster.
Absolute disaster in this area as well as others, because it was her policy really not to consider Russia a potential aggressor, but rather to sort of play Russia off against us. I mean, it was a disastrous policy. Look, one of the reasons President Trump is so frustrated, and what he said about Zelensky was intemperate and, let's face it, unfair. But one of the reasons the president's so frustrated is because this war never should have happened and wouldn't have happened if he'd remained president, or if other Western leaders hadn't spent the previous 10 years appeasing Vladimir Putin. Yeah. And so I think the president feels like that Zelensky really ought to give some tactical running room to the one Western leader who's been effective in the last decade. So
I agree.
I don't blame the president for his frustration at all. Now, yes, he said some things he shouldn't have said and that weren't true. But you notice Zelensky met with Kellogg and issued a very nice statement. This has got a long way to go. And I'm still very hopeful we'll get an honorable peace in Eastern Europe.
So am I. And now I come to the thing that has really bothered me over the last 48 hours. A couple of my longtime acquaintances who have very big problems with Donald Trump have jumped on his comments as though that's the only thing that happened in the last 4 weeks. And I'm beginning to think there's a portion of the American public, especially among pundits, who would rather see Donald Trump fail in an effort to bring about a stable ceasefire than to see Ukraine survive.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's probably true. I like to think it's not true of most of them. But, I mean, there is this Trump derangement syndrome is for real. And look, again, what the president said was intemperate and in many respects unfair. And my guess is, the good of Donald, he's a master of social media. And one of the reasons he is because he's spontaneous and authentic. And once in a while, he says some things which, while he'd never admit it, my guess is probably an hour after he said them, he wished he'd phrased it a different way.
And once in a while, he switches tracks in the middle of a sentence. So he was talking about Zelensky, then he was talking about Biden when he said Biden did this awful stuff and said these, I'm sure he was talking about minor incursion, which he's brought up. But when he switches tracks, if you don't know how to speak Trump, you get off the wrong track.
Right. I don't think he meant, by the way, that Ukraine or Zelensky started the war.
Right.
I think what he meant was, and if you listen to his comments as a whole, what he meant was the war occurred because of the failures and the fecklessness of Western leaders in Europe. And I think that's absolutely correct. And then I think he also believes that Zelensky should have made a major effort for a negotiated solution after the first year of the war, when the battlefield situation basically favored Ukraine. And I wrote the same thing 20 months ago.
And the frustrating part is that the Biden team was so weak. What he might have been, the Kursk salient might have happened a long time ago. The rapid year 2 advance might have gone farther and longer. And they had ATACMS they couldn't use and tanks that hadn't been delivered and F-16 or A6s that hadn't been sent. I mean, the Biden administration's record on this is horrific.
Yes, it was at best lethargic without any ingenuity to it. And that would have been the time, I think, in the late spring, the summer of 2023, to try and get the kind of deal that Trump is now trying to get out of Putin. And I hope he still will be able to get out of him. But the battlefield situation's changed since then. It's much less favorable now for Ukraine. It's still basically stalemated, but Ukraine is in danger, much greater danger of collapsing than Russia is. Look, this from the standpoint of the United States, Russia has lost this war. You mentioned Finland and Sweden. Their entrance into NATO with their military capabilities is a major strategic defeat for Russia. So
yes.
if we can get out of this war with stability, with a commitment on the part of the Ukraine of the Europeans to help build Ukraine, and with the kind of economic relationship between the United States and Ukraine, so we have a stake in their security, which is why Trump wants the rare earths. See, this is another thing. I'm starting to rant now, but Zelensky should not have turned him down flat. It's very much in Ukraine's interest to become a major supplier to the United States of critical minerals like rare earths.
Yeah,
and why shouldn't he give us a break on the price? I mean, if he wants us to be an ally, he's got to create a relationship where we get something out of it. Ukraine is not our ally, They're not a member of NATO. We don't have an obligation to defend them.
Jim, can you stay for another segment? Because I want to follow up on that. It's not been discussed anywhere. And it's an oversight of everyone because it's been pitched like we were trying to blackmail Zelensky instead of we were trying to enter into a partnership that would make more sense to the average American citizen. So, Senator, we began talking about this rare earth mineral agreement. I don't know what's in it. I think Scott Bessent is a very smart guy from what I've seen. I don't think we're trying to gouge profits out of Ukraine. I think we're trying to establish a partnership that would be mutually beneficial and would explain to America why we have an interest in Ukraine. Your assessment.
Sure. That's how Zelensky should have seen it, in my view. Now, is the Trump administration capable of driving a hard bargain when they have somebody over the barrel? Well, sure. But this is the burden of leadership. I mean, you get on the phone with the president, or you talk with Bessent, and you negotiate a deal that's acceptable. And it's not going to be the only thing in the deal. I mean, Ukraine is going to get a lot of direct aid, and some of that might come from the United States, no matter what Trump says. I mean, if he needs to get a deal, if he's got to throw in some American money and have it not all come in from the Europeans, he'll do it. So, I mean, Zelensky, in my opinion, just needs to be solid about this. And he also needs to remember that he made a pretty serious mistake in his little sort of mini love affair with the Biden administration and the Harris campaign last year. I mean, that was an unwise thing for him to do under those circumstances. So he's got, the president's annoyed with him. That's no reason for him to get this.
I also hope General Kellogg gave him a tutorial. I told my law students this week, how do you treat your clients? Because sometimes you have to put up with a lot from your clients if you're a practicing lawyer. Sometimes you have to fire them. But Zelensky's not in a position to fire Donald Trump. He just can't.
No. And he's very dependent on him. So, and again, what I said before, Ukraine is not a member of NATO. We are not bound by treaty to defend them. And so therefore, he should want us to be bound by interest. Now, it was very much in our interest to degrade the power of the Russian state, which is the reason I believe it was the right thing to support Ukraine in the first place. But that's happened. You mentioned before in a segment that, Russia's casualties are probably killed and wounded in the 700,000 to 800,000 range.
Yeah.
They've taken an enormous hit. NATO has been strengthened by the admission of Finland and Sweden. Russia's come off strategically the loser, so our interests have been vindicated. And so,
remember the guy before your time in the Senate who said declare victory and go home about Vietnam? Russia's in a Vietnam. I think they want to declare victory and go home, and we shouldn't make it hard for them to do that.
Right, I agree. Now, look, if I could talk to Marco Rubio directly, I would ask him some questions about some of the things the president said. For example, the president's talked so much about the desire for peace, which I'm saying to myself, that's unusual for Trump because he's emphasizing how much he wants an agreement, which normally weakens your negotiation position. But I'll tell you, and I say this on the pod all the time, I am no longer underestimating Trump or his negotiating ability, and I'm going to assume he knows what he's doing until it's proven otherwise.
Wise words for everyone. Senator Jim Talent, always a pleasure. Thank you, Senator. Talk to you again soon. Joined by Olivia Beavers of the Wall Street Journal. Olivia, there's a lot of discussion about what the Republicans are actually planning to do when it comes to tax cuts. You covered it in the Journal last week. Any updates on what that budget resolution looks like as it heads to the floor?
Well, Hugh, we have been trying to report out because last minute there was an amendment added which sort of ties the president's tax cuts to basically some social net programs like Medicaid. So if they cut more into Medicaid, there's more money for the president to enact the tax cuts or, get rid of tax on tips, whatever his tax agenda is. And that is starting to make some centrist rank and file Republicans queasy because we've talked to quite a few, and we have a story coming out soon, who say if there are cuts to Medicaid that are outside of three criteria. One is work requirements. They're okay with that. The other is if they kick off sort of illegal migrants who are on the system, as long as it's U.S. and lawful citizens on there, and then whatever sort of can fall under waste, fraud, and abuse. Outside of that, if there are cuts to Medicaid, they say that they're going to vote against it. And it looks like there are enough Republicans where they could impact the future of the bill passing the House floor, which is expected to come up for a vote next week.
Now, Olivia, I saw the name David Valadao in one of the stories. David will lose a primary challenge. He'll lose the general election if he kills the budget. Did you talk turkey with the candidates who are making noise about the fact that they're done if they stop the budget resolution?
Yes, and Valadao is one of the members I have talked to. I don't think that they're trying to stop the budget resolution so much as basically they have to go back to the drawing board and say, we need to make sure we come up with a number that's not impacting Medicaid. And there are quite a few, I think, members in that camp where they say they can't go back home and run for a re-election if they are touching Medicaid. And one thing that they all point to is how Steve Bannon is saying that there are now MAGA voters who are on Medicaid. So that is sort of starting to impact potentially, that could change, but that's impacting maybe the numbers that we're going to see in terms of tax cuts and what that can look like. But there's a ton of sort of different offsets and things being tossed around right now, and I think that they're trying to figure out if the final number that you saw go out of the Budget Committee is a final number they're going to see come out of the House. So there's still a ton of things that are up in the air. And in the meanwhile, the Senate is moving forward with their budget plan. And something pretty funny happened, which was President Trump came out on Tuesday with Hannity saying that he didn't want to touch Medicare or Medicaid, which would put into question whether he is going to support what the ultimate House bill is. But then a day later, he says he supports one big, beautiful bill, which will be the House bill. So Republicans are generally thinking, okay, Trump is going to back our way, but we just need to make sure we don't touch Medicaid.
Now, I gotta ask you about the Medicaid thing. I was a Medicaid regulator for a long time.
Yep.
Medicaid doesn't work in California. No one will take it. And so we give a lot of money to California, for example, for Medicaid, and it's inefficiently spent. Do the people that you're talking to have any idea how bad Medicaid is? In the case of the California program, I can't remember what it's called, but it's got a different name from Medicaid, Medi-Cal. It just doesn't work. Do they know that?
I hear a different story from the ones who are the Republicans who are pushing for it, and they say that they're hearing a lot from the people who are on Medicaid, the people who are healthcare professionals, whether it's clinics, doctors, and whatnot. And I'm not an expert in this realm, so maybe whereas it might be in one way in California, it might be completely different in a different state. But they're saying that it's a lot of their voters who are on Medicaid and rely on it for their health care. And if they try to go back home and say, we had to accept cuts to get the president's priority through, they're like, that's not going to work.
I just don't believe it. That's why I don't doubt they told you it, Olivia.
Yeah.
I don't think they actually have voters who depend on Medicaid, because Medicaid doesn't work in California. David Valadeo is from California. I don't know what they get for the Medicaid dollars. When you next talk to him, ask him if he has a clue on how it works, because it does not, Medi-Cal does not work. And anyone who's ever been on Medi-Cal or tried to support it knows that. Anyone else besides Valadeo, I don't want to pick on him alone, is David Joyce, my hometown congressman. I hope he's not involved with this.
I haven't talked to Congressman Joyce. I know that there are Rob Bresnahan, who is one of the Republicans who flipped a Democratic seat towards Republican this cycle, and is kind of considered a frontliner. He put out a tweet last week suggesting that he would oppose cuts to Medicaid, and that was not what.
I'm just making a list of people who won't be back for the 2026 Congress, and it's people that screw up this budget deal. Olivia, thank you. Follow her at Olivia_Beavers or at the Wall Street Journal, where she writes. Thank you, Olivia. I'm never going to hear that song again. Hopefully I never do hear that song again. But if I do, I will think of the Ruthless podcast because of today's 500th edition of the Ruthless podcast, which you can like and subscribe to anywhere you get your podcast. And, of course, this is a commercial for 7 Things You Can't Say About China. Cotton came up with the line about Kennedy and OnlyFans.
Oh,
that was drive off the road funny because okay, now I want to go serious. I began the show today by talking about Ukraine and Israel. Israel is the worst story in the world because it involves the death of children and the utter evil that is sort of Mordor, that is Gaza. And then Ukraine is complicated because Zelensky doesn't, I don't know that Zelensky understands Trump. Do you think Zelensky understands Trump?
I don't know. I mean, look, I think he understands that President Trump campaigned on the idea that we're going to get rid of these foreign entanglements. We're going to actually try to sort things out, restore world order, and restore America to the leader of the free world, which is our rightful place and the way that we should be. And so he understands that there is commitments and negotiations that they're going to have to do. Do I think he understands the psychology of him? I don't know, Hugh. I think time will have to tell on that. But look, I'm just grateful that President Trump is in office and his team is in office to have these conversations. We went for 4 years with an administration that couldn't explain our interests and wouldn't explain our interests and a whole bunch of things. And it creates chaos, right? I mean, there may be very valuable reasons for us to do what it is that we're doing, obviously with Israel, but, perhaps Ukraine and beyond, that were just never explained. And so you can't blame an American public that's pretty skeptical about sending, $300 billion out when they don't know what the mission is.
And I also think because of the way that Trump talks, he will switch subjects in midstream. So if he says they caused this war, I'm pretty sure he's talking about Biden and the minor incursion thing. But I think maybe Zelensky heard that he started the war. I don't know. But I have 4 propositions for you, Josh Holmes. Putin is evil, but Russia cannot be defeated. It's a nuclear superpower. Hamas is evil and must be defeated.
Yes.
Iran is evil and could be defeated. China is the deadliest of all. We're not going to defeat China, but we must absolutely prioritize and turn our attention to them. Any of those question. 4 that you disagree with?
No, not even a little bit. And I don't even disagree with the formulation in the way that you sequenced it. I mean, the Hamas thing is a no-brainer. Like, moral clarity is the most important thing that we have here in America. And there is no 2 sides of the story of what's happening in Israel and Hamas's role in it. Trump understands this. I think anybody with a brain understands this. And it's something that we can do something about, which I think is most important. Ukraine is complicated. Russia is an adversary, unquestionably. I think you're right that they cannot be, quote unquote, defeated. But what they also can't think is that, basically what their incursion into Ukraine in the first place was a response to what happened in Afghanistan, with America leaving under horrible conditions, leaving all blood and treasure basically behind there, and opening up this vacuum where he thought, you can do anything you want. What you can't have is a prospective view of America abandoning the world, and that relates to China, where America leaves and where American influence leaves, China fills up. We've seen that over and over again. He wouldn't have had to talk to Panama about the Panama Canal in the first 3 weeks if that proposition didn't exist. And so, look, I think they get it. They get the broad picture, but it's going to take a lot of work because there is a big mess left behind.
All right. So last question, exit question, and Josh Holmes, I'm not sure you agree with me on this. I think there are a lot of people, especially in legacy media and certainly in the Democratic Party, who would rather see Donald Trump fail than Ukraine survive. And by that, I mean they're trying to drive a wedge between Trump and Zelensky in order to make it more complicated for Trump to help Zelensky or Zelensky to accept reasonable terms. Do you think I'm nuts?
No, I don't. Listen, I've become so cynical. I actually don't think that the Democrats have hit rock bottom yet. And the reason that they haven't hit rock bottom yet is because they don't actually believe in anything. The only thing that they are successfully articulating is their levers of power and their abhorrence to anyone who would take it away. They don't articulate a single thing about how they could make life better for your average American. They don't articulate a single thing about the world, the global stage. What's their view? What's America's role in the world? They say nothing about any of that. And if that is your proposition, you are basically just an opposition party, and in this case, to one man, Donald Trump. And that is not an existence that any political party in a vibrant democracy can survive within.
Absolutely not. Josh Holmes, congratulations. 500 episodes of the Ruthless podcast. I urge everyone to go, especially today. Again, it's R-rated, but it's funny R-rated. You'll laugh. It's like watching a Guy Ritchie movie with 4 main characters. Thank you, Josh. Be well.
Thank you, Hugh. You're the best.
And one of the reasons you ought to follow Josh Holmes on X, at Holmes Josh, he called my attention to a Washington Free Beacon story. Doge finds $2 billion in taxpayer funds earmarked for Stacey Abrams-linked group. EPA Chief Lee Zeldin says revelation extremely concerning. Doge discovered $2 billion in taxpayer funds set aside for fledgling nonprofit linked to perennial Georgia Democratic candidate Stacey Abrams. I wrote a piece for Fox News, The Last Temptation of a Grant Maker. I was a grant maker for 20 years, California Arts Council, Prop 10 Commission. And the last temptation, the worst, is to give the money to yourself. And that may have happened. We'll find out. You can go over to Dwayne.world if you want more great content. Lilacs today. You can also go to YouTube, my channel, like and subscribe as you should for the Ruthless Podcast.